Netflix and Paramount are both trying to buy Warner Brothers. And yeah, that means your prices could go up and up. Now, there are a lot of things wrong with these bids, and people get confused. So let's just start with how we got here. Warner Brothers put itself up for sale. That is the media giant that also owns a major Hollywood studio for producing movies, the iconic HBO brand, HBO Max, all of that. Combined with Discovery, which Warner Brothers also owns, it is the fourth largest streaming service in America. Last week, Warner Brothers announced that Netflix had won the bidding war. But now, Paramount is launching what's called a hostile bid to swoop in and try to elbow out Netflix. Remember, this entire Warner Brothers bidding war raises red flags. Why? Because we're talking about some of the biggest media conglomerates in the world getting even bigger. And when one company dominates an industry and there's less competition, a few things can happen. Your costs will probably go up. Your options for shows and movies will likely get worse, and union workers just might lose their jobs.
This is a jolt for Hollywood and for streamers all around the world. You know, we live in a streaming era that has been defined by Netflix. Netflix has been growing by leaps and bounds for years. We already talk about it as the king of the streaming services, and now, Kate, it is trying to get even bigger.
Think about it this way. If Netflix or Paramount are allowed to buy Warner Brothers, that means one media giant would own a huge portion of the market. So, one giant company will have control over even more of your favorite shows, like, and that's just to name a few.
So Netflix is clearly interested and wants to take over the HBO Max streaming service, the HBO content library, the Warner Brothers movie and TV studio. You know, this would this would bring together two of the three biggest streamers out there, and it would involve Netflix taking over one of the most famed movie studios on the planet.
So why am I saying your costs could go up? Well, right now, you have a few different streaming options based on what you want to watch. You want to watch White Lotus, one of my faves. You can subscribe to HBO Max. You want to watch Love is Blind. You can subscribe to Netflix. In other words, Netflix and HBO Max are competing for your views. So these rival companies have an incentive to make their content better, so you subscribe to their streaming service. And if one of them raises their prices too high, shoot, you might just cancel your subscription. But here's the deal. If two of these big companies merge, they no longer have to compete with each other to get you to subscribe. They know that if you want to watch a popular show, there's a good chance you will have to pay them because they are powerful enough that they have most of the big shows and movies. And then that means they can charge higher and higher prices because what's your alternative? You won't have one. And that's what's happening here. Netflix is the #1 streaming service, and it's set to buy the #4 streaming service. Warner Brothers and Paramount are two of the 5 major U.S. studios. And look, I get it. Prices to stream shows and movies are already way too high. These companies are already too big. But if you don't think they're going to jack up their prices even more if they get bigger, then just take a quick look at what they've done over the past decade. Back in 2015, Netflix, with no ads, was just $7.99 a month. Today, it's $17.99. That's a 125% increase. The only thing keeping them from jacking up prices even higher is the fact that they have some competition. And that won't be the case if they buy out one of their biggest competitors. And that's what's on the table right now. Ever wonder why these giant companies say big mergers are good for business? Where do you think the money for their shareholders comes from? It comes from laying off workers, cutting corners, and ripping money straight out of your pocket. That is the typical monopoly playbook. It's no surprise that Hollywood workers like screen actors and filmmakers are raising the alarm about Netflix trying to buy Warner Brothers. Now, we've talked about prices, they could go up. We've talked about quality, that's likely to go down. And we've talked about workers. Their livelihoods will be put at risk. That is a lose, lose, lose. So what happens next in the Warner Brothers saga? Donald Trump's Department of Justice, headed up by Attorney General Pam Bondi, is going to review the deal. And here's the thing. We have laws on the books that should block either one of these bids. As a country, we've said since the 1800s that we don't believe in monopolies because they're bad for Americans. If you're talking about the aluminum business back in the 1950s, or you're talking about the movie business in the year 2025, same laws still apply. We believe we should stop these giants from dominating an entire industry and making things worse both for consumers and for workers. A possible Netflix Warner Brothers or Paramount Warner Brothers mega merger is pretty much the reason that antitrust laws exist. But under Donald Trump, the review process for mergers like these has become a cesspool of political favoritism and corruption. If you remember, earlier this year, Paramount settled this bogus lawsuit with Donald Trump for $16 million. Then Skydance reportedly made a shady, quote, side deal with Trump. And you know what? The Trump administration approved their merger shortly afterwards. And just this week, Trump said out loud that he'll, quote, be involved as this independent merger review process of Netflix Warner Brothers moves forward. That's not normal. This is a law enforcement matter that should be evaluated based on the facts and the law and nothing more. And now, Paramount's hostile bid for Warner Brothers is backed by a who's who of Trump buddies, from his son-in-law Jared Kushner's private equity firm to the Ellison family to money coming in from the Middle East. And that's not just an issue of possible influence peddling and bribery. That also raises serious national security concerns. Why should Middle East sovereign wealth funds get a say in the future of CNN or in the movies produced in Hollywood? And if that name Ellison sounds familiar, it's because David Ellison is the CEO of Paramount Skydance, and he would be the CEO of Paramount Skydance Warner Brothers if their hostile bid wins out. Look, it's simple. One billionaire should not be able to buy up all of TV and decides who watches what and who pays what. And what's the play with Netflix? Well, we don't know yet. But what we do know is that the Justice Department has to enforce our nation's anti-monopoly laws fairly and transparently to protect consumers and workers, not use this Warner Brothers deal to invite influence peddling and bribery. Look, a giant Warner Brothers merger would create one massive media giant with a huge slice of the market. It could force you into higher prices and fewer choices over what and how you watch, and it could put workers at risk. That's only good for one tiny handful of people, big media executives and their billionaire owners. I'm going to stay in this fight.